Welcome to the 1800s, kids. We've officially now crossed over from the 1700s into the 1800s. So we're going to spend a little time today talking about those first few years of that century. I don't know if you thought about it, but when we say the 1800s, we actually mean it's the 19th century. So the 1800s are the 19th century. When we get to the 1900s, it's the 20th century. And when we get to the 2000s, we're actually living now in the 21st century. So the 1800s are the 19th century, and America has kind of survived the first few threats of possible war with France. Of course, it cost John Adams his job because his whole Federalist Party turns on him, but he does probably save the country by keeping us out of war. So that brings us to this election of 1800. And the election of 1800 is really a rematch of 1796. Another matchup between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And what's really weird is John Adams is the president, and he's being challenged by his vice president. It might be better to say the vice president of the United States, because remember, to be vice president meant you got second place in the election. So it's the president versus the vice president in the election of 1800. And it's really one of the biggest, I think, in American history. Because when John Adams loses, which he does pretty badly, because of his own party kind of going against him, he has an option. He can just stay there in the White House and order the army to surround the White House and say he's not leaving. Or he could do the honorable thing, which is to peacefully give up power and to honor the wishes of the voters and the Electoral College, which he does. It is the first time, really, in the history of the world we have a peaceful transition of power. Adams is a Federalist who lost the election. He leaves the White House without any kind of fuss, and Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic Republican, comes in as president in 1801. And it's the first time, really, this has ever happened. We've never had really a president lose and have to leave, and the world has never really had a president before. So everybody was watching, and most people give John Adams a lot of credit for this. He might not have been the most popular president in the election, but historians are very kind to him now. He saved us by keeping us out of war, and he gave up the presidency when he lost without any kind of fight or any kind of stink like that. So now let's focus on Thomas Jefferson's time as president in that first few years of the 1800s. So if you know anything, I guess, about Thomas Jefferson, you know that he really is good at a lot of things. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was a farmer. He was an inventor. He was a musician. He started the University of Virginia. So he was just good at a lot of things. You might want to call him a Renaissance man. He was good at so many things. And you know that he's a Democratic Republican, and you know what that means, right? He's thought this nation would be run by farmers and small towns, and the states would have all the power. He wasn't saying there wouldn't be an America, there wouldn't be a United States, but what he's saying is, I guess the emphasis is on the word states over united. So he would say we're the United States of America. And, of course, remember the Democratic Republicans were very friendly to the French. They thought the French were all about liberty. They had helped us. We had a great friendship with them. And Thomas Jefferson, when he becomes president, all the problems with France seem to go away. And John Adams is out, and the Federalists are out, and never again will the Federalists run anything. And in fact, that party will begin to die off. But we're friends with France, and that changes everything. And he also believed in a limited federal government, right? He's not about a strong central government. He's more about the states in charge and doing their own thing. And I don't know if any of you have ever been to Thomas Jefferson's house in Virginia, but it's an amazing mansion on top of a mountain. It's called Monticello. And not only is the mansion amazing, but just the way that he ran his farm. Again, he didn't do it all the work, right? He had slaves. And he is a very interesting character because, this is the man who said that all men are created equal, but yet still had slaves. And it's a very complicated relationship that he had with him. They did all the work, but he was friendly to them. His wife died before he became president. And so there are many people who believe, and the historians believe, that he took actually a slave wife and had children with her. So her name was Sally Hemings. So it's a complicated relationship. It's not clear exactly how all the slaves were treated there, but generally probably treated better than most on plantations in the South. This is in Virginia. But again, they are slaves, so they don't have a lot of choices. Even Sally Hemings, who would be his slave wife, I'm not sure she could have said no to his marriage proposal, and his indirect marriage proposal, if you will. So here's the thing about Thomas Jefferson's time as president. It seems like that really a lot of the amazing things that happened during his presidency really happened in his first 4 years. Around the year 1803 seems to be a big one. So 1803 is kind of a year that you're going to have to keep in your brain. By the way, before we leave this mansion here, Monticello, we'll probably spend a little time in class, or maybe when you're not in class, looking at the website. If you've never been to it, it's really an amazing building. There's some cool inventions that Thomas Jefferson invented, and a lot of features to this building that really are just really cool. And most kids and even adults love Thomas Jefferson's house. It's a really cool mansion. In fact, it's on the back of a nickel. So if you could think of a nickel today, Thomas Jefferson's head, his face is on one side of the nickel, and on most nickels on the back would be the Monticello, his house. But like I said, 1803. So Thomas Jefferson is elected president, becomes president in 1801, but really most of the stuff that we need to worry about in 8th grade begin to happen in 1803. The first thing is a Supreme Court case. So whenever you see words like Marbury v. Madison, or Gideon v. Wainwright, or Brown v. the Board of Education, or whenever you see a V in the middle of a couple words, it's a court case, meaning that it went to court, and this is what the title of the court case was. This case, Marbury versus Madison, is considered by most to be the most important Supreme Court case because of a variety of reasons, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But here's the background on the case. So John Adams lost, and right as he's leaving, remember, he's still president up until the time he's not. So as he's leaving in the last few days and hours of his presidency, he begins to appoint people to federal judge jobs. That's one of the things the president can do. So he did that, and the Senate okayed those appointments. Those appointments at the last minute are called midnight appointments. So even though he's leaving, he still has the power of the president. He appoints some people all over the country to be judges. One of those people is a man named Marbury, who is supposed to be a judge in Washington, D.C. And one of the final things that happens is once you're appointed, you're supposed to be given a piece of paper, a fancy piece of paper called a commission, that basically says, okay, you have the job, start on the job now. Well, the new president, Thomas Jefferson, his Secretary of State is James Madison. Thomas Jefferson tells Madison, don't deliver the piece of paper. Don't give Marbury the commission. I don't want that guy as a judge. So that's where the names come from. Marbury, who got appointed by Adams, Madison, who is Secretary of State under Jefferson. It's basically the two parties are battling it out. The Federalist, Marbury, versus Madison, the Democratic Republican. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides in 1803 that, okay, Marbury, you could have the job, and really that's not the most important thing. The Supreme Court said, really, the law that said that we have any say in this, meaning we, the Supreme Court, the Judiciary Act of 1789, we talked about this maybe last week or two, that law that said the Supreme Court has some say in whether people get their commission or not, that law is unconstitutional. So by saying that, this is the first time the Supreme Court ever used this powerful weapon it has, like its superpower, called judicial review. And it means that the Supreme Court now can strike down any law that they think violates the Constitution. So this law, the Judicial Act of 1789, or the Judiciary Act of 1789, they thought violated the Constitution, meaning they, the Supreme Court. So this case, by giving the Supreme Court its superpower, puts it on the same level as the President and Congress. So whenever we talk about now the Supreme Court declaring laws unconstitutional, it all comes from this first case, Marbury versus Madison, in 1803. So it's really not that big a deal about whether Marbury got the job or not, but what comes from this case is this idea that the Supreme Court has this power and that it's just as powerful as the President and the Congress. And there'll be a video, a short little 2 or 3 minute video in our folder that will help explain Marbury versus Madison, because it can be a little confusing, but all you need to know is that this case in 1803 really elevates the Supreme Court to the same level as the presidency in the United States Congress. So that's 1803. What else is happening in 1803 under Thomas Jefferson's time as president? Well, you're sitting in it. Ohio. Ohio has reached the point now to become a state. Remember, in the 1790s, there was a lot of Native American issues and the Battle of Fallen Timbers and then the Treaty of Greenville. But once all the natives are removed from Ohio, more and more Americans moved to the territory, and by 1803 there's enough, 60,000 people, that Ohio can ask Congress to become a state. And in 1803 Congress says yes. So our first capital of the state is that little red dot there. I don't know if you can see it. It's Chillicothe. And this capital will bounce around a lot from Chillicothe to Zanesville, Chillicothe, and then finally in Columbus. But originally our first capital is in Chillicothe, and Ohio would be the 17th state added to the Union. So America is growing, and now under Jefferson we have a new state. If you look at this slide there, you can see some of the cool images of Ohio and the quarter. We've talked about state quarters a lot this year. Remember, we talked about Caesar Rodney and the New Jersey quarter with Washington crossing the Delaware during the Revolution. Well, Ohio, we're known really for flight and aeronautics and space. So we have that on our quarter. So we've got Marbury versus Madison in 1803, Ohio becoming a state in 1803. And finally, the big thing that we should remember about 1803 for Jefferson is that in that year, Jefferson, because he's so friendly to the French, remember he's a Democratic Republican, and now we're best buds with the French, they decide to sell us a huge chunk of land known as Louisiana. And if you look at the map there, it's that green section in the middle. It's huge. You know, it's going to double the size of the United States. We buy it for about $15 million, which is hardly anything. And by doing so, Jefferson doubles this new nation. And so we go from, basically a third of what we are today to 2/3 of what we are today. Now the question is, can the President of the United States buy land? Well, if you think back to what Jefferson would have said before he became president, it was no. If the Constitution doesn't say it, whether it's creating a bank or buying land, you can't do it. Well, now that he's president, he kind of changes his tune a little bit because he wants that land. And so, of course, the French want to sell it. They aren't really interested in North America anymore, and we buy it for $15 million. Of course, we don't ask the Native Americans living on the land, all of that. They have no say in it. It's really the European power of France and the United States that developed this land purchase. So it really does change the way America looks, the frontier. It shapes the destiny of the United States, and it will have a huge impact on, obviously, all the Native American tribes living in that territory. And we don't even know what's out there. We buy this for $15 million. Jefferson really has no clue what kind of land it is, who lives out there, whether there's mountains or deserts. He doesn't know what kind of animals or anything. The plants, he has no clue. But he knows it's too good of a deal to pass up. And so he creates right away like a group of people. You've probably heard of Lewis and Clark. We're going to spend some time this week talking about them and their amazing journey to explore the Louisiana Purchase and beyond, actually. So Lewis and Clark, and then people like Sacagawea would be the Native American guide who helped them find their way. And if you look at this map, you can kind of see their route starting in 1804. So we buy it in 1803, and by the time they get the group of about 50 people organized, they start in 1804. So it's a couple years journey. It's crazy where they have to go. They don't know where they're going. They just know that they should probably go this direction, upriver, across mountains in the middle of winter time and spring and summer. It's just an amazing, amazing expedition in American history. So we actually are going to spend a lot of time on that in class this week. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. Man, 1803 is big. We got Marbury versus Madison. We got Ohio becoming a state, and now the Louisiana Purchase from France. All that is kind of a big year for the Jefferson presidency. So with that, we'll wrap up this little talk. But again, watch us as much as you need it, and don't forget the helper video about Marbury versus Madison.